All right, what's up? Good morning. PT on Ice. Happy Thursday, everybody. Good to see you. I apologize. I'm a bit early. I've got to get into work pretty early this morning. We have a bunch of things on the docket, so firing this up at 5:30 my time. But hopefully everybody's well. Hopefully everybody can catch this as their schedule is convenient for them. So big thanks to everybody lately. A great weekend last weekend. I think we ran 5 courses across the country. Had an absolute blast. So thanks to everyone for coming out in mass. A lot of good stuff coming up. As for me, I will be in South Dakota here coming up for about a week with some mentoring and then actually a private course. But then I jump over to Santa Barbara and Traverse City the next 2 weekends, which I believe are both open to the public courses. And then we have Marquette University coming up. So that's always that course is always a blast at Marquette University in Milwaukee the weekend before Thanksgiving. I think we're doing lumbar this year. I want to say this is like the 4th or 5th year in a row we've done that course the weekend before Thanksgiving. So always a good time. I'm always slipping in some cheese curds and what have you and enjoying Milwaukee. So hopefully a bunch of you all can make it out to that. But let's jump in and chat. I've often been challenged in the past on kind of my stance on fostering small networks, right? Or encouraging students to keep their network of limited size, right? And the reason that folks tend to get on me about that is that the baseline, I think, or default thought is that large networks are better, right? That bigger is better. And that the more people that you know, the better that serves your mission. And I would challenge that a bit, right? That reflex should really be there. Hey, what's up, Brittany? Thanks for listening on the old commute. I would challenge that reflex that bigger has to be better regarding networks, and would instead say it's really goal dependent. Right now, there's plenty of times where I do think trying to foster a large network is wise. Right. I mean, certainly from a sales perspective, if you're trying to sell something, particularly if it is a low or moderate priced product, right, a huge network is clutch, right? Because with that kind of a product, you don't need a really close relationship between buyer and seller. And certainly the more people that you get it in front of, the better. If you're trying to gain sponsorship, right, and you want a big audience so that folks feel it's worthwhile to kind of put their brand next to yours. If you're trying to scale change, and the change you're trying to scale requires mobilizing a massive amount of people, those are all undeniably times where having a really big network is one of the most valuable things that you can do. Now, that being said, where most folks interact with myself or our company is people who are trying to develop mastery in their trade, right? So they are trying to become exceptional clinicians and be able to connect with their patients and reduce pain and disability in a very high percentage of people very efficiently and really become top 5%. And we hear that goal all the time from the individuals that are going through our courses. They are trying to gain mastery. Now, to gain mastery, you need to have mentorship, you need to have growth and change. And this is where I think the conversation switches, because to have that growth in a mentor-mentee relationship or even a collegial relationship, it's really dependent upon or predicated by your perceived gap in skill with the individual mentoring you and the level of trust that you have in that relationship. So let's unpack that a bit and see kind of how that relates to network size. So the perfect learning environment is where the student is completely open, right, and non-defensive, right? So when the mentor is delivering critique or feedback, the student is completely unresistant to that. They are completely open to it. They see it only as constructive. They in fact crave that feedback and try to implement it immediately, right? Kind of this perfect mentor-mentee relationship. The reality, though, is that the mentor criticism is tough, right? I mean, we have natural defense mechanisms. I mean, if you think back to the last time somebody was really getting after you, right, and really giving you very direct, strong criticism, think about how you felt. I mean, I can promise you there's some level of anger, right? That's kind of reflexive, right? You start developing a lot of excuses. You begin creating alternative truths, right? Why that person might be wrong. And those are very ego-driven responses, but they're very natural. I would say those are the natural responses to someone kind of leaning onto you is for you to push back a little bit, right? The issue is that is the exact opposite environment of that perfect learning relationship that we talked about, where the majority of your growth and change to develop you towards mastery can take place, right? In that environment, you were totally open, totally non-defensive. So the question then is, if we've got this little bit of a discrepancy, how do we break down those natural responses of defensiveness and excuse development and quite honestly anger and frustration, and create that open, fostering environment where growth towards mastery, which seems to be the goal, can take place, right? My thought in looking at this scenario is that it happens when you perceive a tremendously large gap in skill between you and your mentor, and when trust is on board. Right, so thinking about the perceived gap in skill. So these are kind of the two things that I think drive this positive relationship. So I'll give you a personal example, and hopefully some of you were able to listen to the Evidence in Motion podcast that I did with Barb Stevens, right? So Barb Stevens, I will largely and repeatedly say, has been one of my primary mentors in growth towards where I'm at in the clinic and where I'm trying to be as a professional. And one thing about Barb, so when I published that episode, all of us that have went through the Evidence in Motion Fellowship got a good laugh out of it, because we all have stories about Barb, right? Because Barb, one thing about her is she gives very unfiltered, very direct feedback. And so almost everybody kind of goes through these growth phases with Barb. And the first one is that when you first get hit with that kind of feedback, again, you have those defense mechanisms, right? You start saying, well, take it easy, look, here's why I was looking at it that way. And you're trying to explain yourself, and you're trying to build yourself back up, right? But what happens is when you spend enough time with Barb or a mentor of this caliber, what came to happen to me was that every time she would critique one of my cases, right, and she would say, Jeffrey, what were you thinking here? Like, you should have looked at this. And sure enough, there were my natural defense mechanisms, right, trying to explain to myself why I didn't. But she would say, if you're seeing this patient again this week, make sure you look at this. So begrudgingly, right, when I saw that patient on Wednesday, I would go and that would be the first thing I would look at. And without fail, right, Barb's insight was invaluable to dramatically shifting the course of that patient to one that was more effective, right? Now, the first couple times that happens, there's still some room for you to internally debate, like, well, maybe she got lucky, right? Maybe I was right, or maybe I could have been right. But when it happens enough times in a row, right, at some point you say, you know what? It seems like this lady's always right, or at least the vast majority of the time. And what happens then is that you just simply perceive that this person has a way better handle on this than I do. They have proven that to me over and over and over again. Right? So whether I want to rebuttal or not, what winds up happening is you drop your defenses, because they have proved so many times that their insight, right, is deeply valuable to where you're trying to go, is better than yours, that it gets to a point where the moment they're talking, you have no defenses, because they have earned that level of respect from you, that they are so much further ahead than you that all you want to do is take in their information. You have stepped towards becoming that perfect learner. Right, when your mentor is giving you that advice, you're completely open to it, but you got there because the mentor showed you over and over and over and over again the value of what they had to say. So that's what I mean by you having this perceived large gap between where you are at and where your mentor is at, and how that facilitates learning. Because when you honestly perceive that gap, you're no longer defensive against them. Instead, all you want to do is draw all the information you can from them, even when that contradicts your beliefs, because you believe theirs are probably right and yours are probably wrong. That creates a tremendous learning environment. And for all of us who are naturally defensive, it's almost mandatory to exceptional learning, because you have to get past those early defenses of you wanting to dig in and you wanting to kind of save your own ego. The issue you can imagine with it, and this gets back to the size of network thing, is that it takes a while for that kind of a mentorship relationship to develop. Because Barb had to prove to me, she didn't have to do anything, right? But she did prove to me over and over and over and over again that she was usually right and I was usually wrong. And that took a fairly long period of time. It took a lot of interactions and a lot of case study and a lot of time spent together to get to that point. The issue, folks, is that you can't get to that point with very many people, right? So that's why I talk about when it comes to developing mastery, when it comes to looking for mentorship, that large networks can sometimes impair it, because in a large network, when you're trying to connect with a ton of people, you can't get with any of those people to this level where you have that open relationship due to time spent and experiences earned. Right? Instead, it's when you have a really small network of people that you have this really exceptional, or these people that you really look up to because you have this huge perceived gap, because you've spent enough time together to earn it. It's in that environment where you drop the gloves down, right? Where you open up and say, look, I've seen enough, right? Whatever way you think I should go, I'm going to go that way and see if that works out better than where I was going to go. Because what I've seen over time is that you've got this down and I'm still working on it. So again, it takes a lot of time to invest to get to a relationship to that point. Thus, keeping a network small and investing sufficiently in these relationships to get at least a few of them to that point, I think is what creates that space where you can make that tremendous leap towards mastery, because that perceived gap in excellence is on board. And the other one right behind it that creates and fosters that excellent learning environment is trust, right? Like there's no way that you can take someone just raining down, aggressive, relatively unfiltered feedback. There's no way you can take that in a non-defensive manner, take it well, right? Take it, actually be fond of that kind of criticism, unless you absolutely believe that that person's intention is solely to grow you, right? It is solely to make you better. It's all about you. Right? Again, we're going to have natural responses when someone's criticizing them, that they're doing it for the wrong reasons, they're doing it for their ego, right? They like to be in that position of authority. Like those natural human mechanisms, those defense mechanisms are going to rear their head again, unless you have spent enough time around this person to believe that they as a person, right, are all about making you better, that they as a person have their heart in the right place, their intention in the right place. And you look up to them as an individual to a point where you don't believe those kind of negative, maladaptive things are driving this scenario. Instead, you believe every bit of criticism they are giving you is well-intentioned, is absolutely for the betterment of you as a person and as a professional. And when you have that trust, right, it's amazing how hard people can be on you, and you to still see that in a favorable light and still crave that feedback and still incorporate that immediately. But the ringer, as I'm sure you guys are seeing the trend here, is that the one thing that developing that depth of trust requires is time. So yet again, we make the argument that you can't invest that level of time to build trust that is that deep, right? That helps to shield you from some of those defense mechanisms, right? You can't put that kind of time into everybody in a gigantic network, right? Which again, if mastery is the goal, in movement towards excellence is the goal, there is something to be said about keeping your network relatively small so you can invest a level of time to get to that depth of trust, as well as to get to a point where you have repeated experiences that allow you to perceive a gap between you and mentor that is big enough, that puts your gloves down and says, enough about me trying to prove why my thoughts were important, and more of you bringing me to the point that I'm trying to get to. That is why I oftentimes advocate for smaller networks, and why I think sometimes it's folly that we're always trying to grow and grow and grow the amount of people that we're exposed to. And I guess my challenge to you in my last few minutes is look at your network and think about your goals. And do you really need to try and get in touch with more people? Do you really need your name exposed to more? Or do you need to deepen the relationships that you have in your existing network? Going even further, do you need to trim your network, right? Do you kind of need to look at who's in your circle and say, How many of these folks am I anywhere near the kind of relationship that we're talking about where we get into that neutral space, where we get into that spot that we can say things to each other that are aggressive critique and only have it be seen as this is being said because it gives us the greatest chance to move forward, right? Do you need to trim to get to that level of depth? Sometimes, right, being a mile wide and an inch deep does very little good. Being an inch wide and a mile deep can transform who you are as a person and as a professional. Think about that when you go forward. Think about it as you wonder what conferences to choose to go to, what relationships to spend time in, and just think about what are my goals and are they aligned with how I'm building my network. So hopefully that has some value. Certainly it means a lot to me. I would love to hear some feedback on it and thoughts you all have. Other than that, I got to get my butt to work. Got a big day ahead of me. A lot of great things going on in the industrial health world here in Northern Colorado. But to get them going on, I got to get over there. Everybody have an awesome Thursday. If you're in clinic, enjoy. If we're going to see you at a weekend course coming up soon, can't wait to do so. Take care, everybody.